6 Tudor Queens. Katherine of Aragon, the True Queen. A Review, Part 2. Today is the second part of our 6 Tudor Queens, Katherine of Aragon, the True Queen review. The first video covered Katherine's teenage years, her marriage to Prince Arthur, her long wait to marry Henry, and the first 15 years of their marriage, the loss of her poor children. So, without further prevarication, let's get started. Katherine goes through the menopause in her late 30s, which is relatively early. She feels she has to tell Henry, and after she does, Henry refuses to sleep with her, which causes her great emotional pain. Henry starts to pursue a divorce, knowing he will have no more children by Katherine. Katherine finds out through her servants that Cardinal Wolsey has conveyed a secret meeting to see if the king's marriage is valid, but she does not take it very seriously. Then Henry tells Katherine he wants a divorce because he is scared of civil war after his death, because he has no sons. Katherine cannot wrap her head around this. She does not understand why her daughter Mary simply cannot be queen regnant in her own right. Katherine is also very upset by the grounds on which Henry is pursuing a divorce. She is deeply hurt by the idea that Henry thinks she has been lying to him about her marriage to Arthur for all this time. But the real dagger in Katherine's heart is the fact Henry wants to marry one of her maids of honour, Anne Boleyn, who is a commoner. The idea that a common woman's son would come before her own daughter in the line of succession is the real thing that sticks in Katherine's throat. It is during this time that Jane Seymour joins Katherine's household as a maid of honour. Katherine appeals her case to Rome, and the Pope sends a legate called Cardinal Campeggio to judge her case with Wolsey in England. The scene where Katherine addresses Henry in open court and makes her famous moving speech is very touching, and it was great getting a POV of her during this speech, when she thinks to herself early on that this appeal to Henry was a bad idea, but he is in public and cannot back down, so she keeps going, knowing that Henry is going to be very angry at her. I think during this time of the trial and afterwards during the appeal to Rome, Katherine becomes a little deluded. Katherine should have realized that the king wanted rid of her no matter what because he wanted an heir. This should have become very clear when the two cardinals suggest she enter a convent. Katherine didn't have to enter a convent, however. She could have simply agreed to the separation due to consanguinity like Eleanor of Aquitaine and Louis VII of France. This would have meant Princess Mary would have retained her place in the succession and her title. I feel also, with all the delays by the Pope, Katherine should have realized earlier on that the Emperor Charles, no matter how much he loved her as his aunt, was prepared to do very little to help her. I know Katherine was fighting for her daughter's rights, but I think her stubbornness did Mary far more harm than good, as if the marriage had been dissolved earlier, Mary would have kept her title of princess. Katherine realizes how much distress the divorce is causing Mary, but does nothing to stop it. She does try to shield her child, which is admirable, but never once realizes she holds the power to stop her child's worries by granting a divorce. But hindsight is always 20/20, and all I can really say is I do not have Katherine of Aragon's conviction. Henry moves Katherine to smaller and smaller palaces, further and further away from the court, and she is very out of touch with the political scene, and I feel this adds to her sense of delusion. Katherine doesn't even realize after Anne is crowned and pregnant that Henry will not return to her, no matter what the Pope rules. During this time, Henry starts dismissing Katherine's close friends like Maria Willoughby, and prevents Katherine seeing her daughter, which is very cruel because Katherine lives in fear of Mary being poisoned. The Act of Succession is brought in by Parliament to say that the king's marriage to Anne Boleyn is valid and Katherine is now to be known as the Princess Dowager, and that Mary is deprived of her title of princess. The most importantly, Henry is head of the Church of England. This enrages Katherine, and she refuses to swear the oath, and there is a lot of fuss about her servants swearing the oath. But the servants do it in the end. The Spanish servants do a play on words, only swearing that they acknowledge the king has made himself head of the church. As a Spanish speaker, I found this amusing. During this time of oath-taking, Catherine does a horrible thing. She urges her teenage daughter Mary to seek martyrdom, instead of taking the oath, as she herself is doing. Catherine is heartbroken at this decision she has taken, but it is an appalling thing to urge a beloved child to do, and this action by Catherine is the only time in the 4 readings of this book I do not like her or agree with any of her decisions. Catherine refuses to let anyone call her by the title Princess Dowager, and sinks into a depression. She is separated from her daughter, her friends, and her husband. She is moved to a very dilapidated old castle, which is damp, and she becomes sick because of it. She sends a request to Henry to move her to a better house, but he refuses, and he sends the Duke of Suffolk to escort her to an even more dilapidated castle. Catherine refuses to go and locks herself in her bedroom for 2 weeks over Christmas. I know she was trying to make a point with this gesture, but honestly, I feel like she should have given in long before this point. She is acting like a teenager. During this time, the Duke of Suffolk is shocked by how old and thin Catherine looks, explaining the king is under the delusion that she is fighting fit and willing to make war on him, and that is why he is being so cruel. Catherine is still in touch with her ambassador Chapuis, while she is confined to this dilapidated castle, and he continually contrives to try and get her to get the emperor to declare war on England, and she refuses to do so, saying that she will not cause harm to any living creature, something that is very admirable given her circumstances. I don't know if I would have been as charitable as she. Henry gives in slightly and moves Catherine to a nicer palace, but because she will still not allow anybody to address her as the Princess Dowager, she is confined to only 2 rooms to avoid an ugly conversation with her castellans. It becomes very obvious in this part of the book she could make all her problems go away by simply giving in to the king's demands, and I admire her strength, keeping to her resolve not to give in. This woman had a backbone made of steel. Catherine starts suffering from bad heart palpitations and shortness of breath. She cannot exert herself in any way, but when she hears her daughter Mary is sick and perhaps close to death from poison, she goes on a letter-writing campaign, writing to Cromwell, Chapuis, and anyone she can think that might convince the king to let her go to her daughter. Henry still will not let her see Mary, so she sends her own doctor instead, leaving her without her primary physician even though she is unwell herself. Motherly love is very strong. Catherine may have had tunnel vision when it came to her divorce and the rightness of her cause, but there is no denying that she loved her daughter completely. Then comes Catherine's final summer, which is marked heavily by the tragedies of Bishop Fisher and Thomas More's execution. These affect her greatly, which is to be expected, and strike fear into her for the safety of Mary. She finally starts seeing the changes that have happened to Henry over the last 7 years, but still blames Anne for all of it. The fear that is generated by these executions make her heart palpitations much worse, and she collapses shortly before Christmas and takes to her bed. Catherine knows she is dying and is full of fear for who will care for her daughter and protect her when she is gone. She is happy to have her maids for company, but wishes Mary and Chapuis could visit her before she dies. She resigns herself to her fate, though. Then, shortly after Christmas, out of the blue, Chapuis arrives and Catherine is overjoyed to see him. He eases her worries, telling her he will care for Mary. This is a very touching scene, because both people involved understand the gravity of it. I may not overly like Chapuis, as he was not an overly nice person. He was such a gossip and a warmonger, but he did truly care for Catherine and Mary. Then the most marvellous thing happens. Maria Willoughby turns up to be with Catherine on her deathbed, defying the king to comfort her best friend in her last hours. Everyone should have a friend like Maria Willoughby. Katherine makes her will and signs it as Queen as a last act of defiance against Henry, but she still deeply loves him and writes him a letter telling him so. After this she feels at peace, and receives the last rites, gently slipping into death. Her last thoughts are looking forward to seeing her parents and her brother, and all the children she has lost. She sees young children and angels lifting their arms to her. It is a very poetic end, and I feel it apt because Katherine was so religious. I like to hope that she was reunited with her lost children. I am not a religious person, but it is comforting to think that she found some peace after enduring so much sorrow. I really love this book. I consider it a masterpiece of historical fiction, and I give it 10 out of 10, and I will probably reread it again in a few years for the 5th time. This is the end of the second part of this book review. If you enjoyed it, please like, comment and subscribe to this channel so you won't miss our next video in the series, Anne Boleyn, the King's Obsession. You can also follow me on Instagram at Lady Jessica Riddell. Until next time, stay humble and loyal. Bye!